I'm Marc Taverner with Bitfury. Bitfury is one of the world's largest full-service blockchain organizations. We total just over 300 people in 14 countries at the moment. And I guess we might be one of the, I know we've got some technology partners in the room, but we might be one of the unique companies in the room in actually bringing blockchain from white papers and presentations and discussions into something very real. We've been operating on the blockchain for 7 years, deploying solutions for large corporates, governments, and it is true, Eva, we are involved quite deeply in the Bitcoin world, which is where we grew up. So we've got 7 years operational experience of working with the world's largest blockchain application, which is Bitcoin. And we're now using that to work with governments, with large organizations around the world, and help them to imagine what blockchain could bring, both to society at large and to organizations. And I just wanted to, I was listening to some of the speakers this morning, and I was reflecting, and I wanted to ask you all a question. How many of you got anxious this morning as you walked into this room about where the electricity was coming from that was going to turn the lights on or was going to warm your coffee up? Virtually none of you. So as we think about blockchain technology, I think the challenge for us all in this room is to make blockchain technology as simple as flicking a switch and having the light come on. We have to have some discussion. We have to understand how to deal with blockchain as a technology, how to create interoperability, how to understand how the applications passport between borders. But ultimately, I think our aim has to be to try and get to a point where we're no longer talking about blockchain, but we're enjoying the advantages from it. There's a very long way to go. So if you just hold that image of flicking the light switch on and not being anxious about where the electricity is coming from, which power station, how is the electricity being transmitted to you, but just enjoying the light that comes on, I think that's where we need to get to. So a little bit about the kind of introduction from Eva. We are working with a very large use case that we talk about quite a bit with the Republic of Georgia, where in a country that has a population of approximately 4.5 million people, we've deployed a blockchain application that allows an individual member of that country to register ownership of probably their most valuable asset, their land, on the blockchain. And that's important because it means they now have a defensible record of ownership of something which is probably going to be their largest asset in life. Which means that if, I don't know, say some natural disaster occurred, heaven forbid, they at least have a record which is available and consultable internationally from anywhere of their proof of ownership of that land. Now, that's important not just in the example of the Republic of Georgia, but as you think about the wider community, the wider society. Only 20% of the world's population have an ability, defensible ability, to prove ownership of their largest asset that they'll probably ever own, their land. So as we think about either an addressable market or a societal challenge, that's quite an interesting, I would say, objective to attain for Bitfury, is how do we take this example that we've developed with our friends at the Republic of Georgia and see where there is opportunity to create a similar type of benefit around the world. Now that brings into mind some big questions that we've been talking about, because you can't just build a solution in isolation. We can't just deploy a similar application in one country. We need to think about, to use a technical term, the interoperability. We need to think about passporting. We need to think about how this service works between borders. So we're very keen to engage with European companies, European governments, and all very large organizations to have this discussion around the technology, the legislation, how we work between governments and large organizations to create an ecosystem, an environment where this technology can genuinely be adopted for good. And in fact, later on this afternoon, between 5 and 7 p.m., we're hosting an event with the Global Business Blockchain Council, which Eva is a founding member of, to engage in a discussion about these types of topics. So what does regulation need to look like? What do some of the really interesting applications appear to be? And that discussion is happening between a group of at this point in time around, well, representatives from 50 different companies around the world. So we're really looking forward to that discussion later on this afternoon. I think some of you whom I've already spoken with are going to be present with us. Just a couple of thoughts to leave you with. As we talk about blockchain, I think it's super important that we all have a little bit of courage, that we begin investigating, that we begin testing, that we begin trialing, that we don't allow this fear of failure, which is a human trait, to stop us from pushing the boundaries, having discussions about regulation and testing the technology. Because unless we do that, we're not going to get much further than white papers and PowerPoints. And that is perhaps the largest inhibitor to us driving adoption of blockchain technologies and creating good for society. It would be a very large challenge, and I was talking with Daniel just earlier, if between us in this room, as participants in this ecosystem, we encouraged a multi-speed adoption of blockchain, where blockchain adoption was only available to those who attended events like this, or only available to those who had access to technology, or only available to those who had wonderful experts such as this and the consultancy advice on their boards to them. I think we need to think far wider than that and be brave. Test the technology, engage at a governmental level, engage at a European level, and work with companies and advisors who are able to create scale. So, final thought for you, and Eva said this one before. I'm French, so I'm allowed to tell stories about frogs. There was a wonderful British writer called Charles Handy, who about 25 years ago wrote about this following little anecdote. Would you prefer to be a frog that sits in cold water as the water is heated up to the point where you finally realise that the water's too hot for you to live and you die? Or would you prefer to realise that the environment is changing around you and be that frog who gets dropped into some hot water and immediately jumps out to try and find a solution because you recognise the environment is changing? So my call to action for you all is to test blockchain technologies. Don't be afraid of it. If you'd like to do it with Bitfury, we'd be delighted. Or if you'd like to join the Global Business Blockchain Council, I'm sure Eva would welcome you with open arms. But find a way to engage and test. Thank you very much.